right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Living Better podcast. I'm your host, Matt, and this is my wife, Jody. And today we have an exciting guest. We are with Claire Moorcraft. She is a pleasure coach and medicine woman, and we're going to dive into all sort of interesting subjects touching on sex, sexuality, and much more. So, Claire, welcome on the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm great. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, this is awesome. Thanks for doing this podcast with us. So let's dive into your life a little bit. How did you become a pleasure coach and medicine woman? If you can expand on that too, it'd be very interesting for our audience to learn more about you.
Yeah, I mean, my journey has been like almost in some ways the complete opposite of what I am now. So I started off my career as I was a pharmacokineticist in the pharmaceutical industry, so very kind of traditionally trained, scientific, Newtonian reductionist, scientifically trained. And I really loved that kind of, I loved my degree in pharmacology. It was really interesting to me because I've always been very aware of, like, I could see something and then I could see the practical application of it as well. But I also loved all the kind of scientific side of things, like figuring out kind of how things work. And but I kind of discovered that I'm not really maybe a scientist per se. Like, I love talking to people and I'm really social. And so from that, I was like, okay, well, how can I use my knowledge and my scientific skills and still be able to help people? And so I just sort of fell into doing medical device sales. Apparently that doesn't really happen, but it just happened to me.
Wow.
People try for years and years and years to get into it. I don't know, it just opened up and I was like, okay, well, I'll do this for a while. And I did that for 10 years, and I ended up in London, and I had the 6-figure sales job. I was really successful. I poured in the 80% of the company's business, and I lived in Hampstead, which is a really beautiful part of London. I had lovely friends. We'd go out for dinner and have cocktails. And so it was like, from the external perspective, I had a really, really successful. I had it all. Yeah. And like, I was known for my creativity, my innovation. I was very personable and I trustworthy and did what I said I was going to do. And so they were all really amazing gifts, but there was also a dark side to these gifts as well, because what people didn't know, and in the background, like, I used to cry every day before work to make myself go into work. I had such bad social anxiety. And it was like, but no one knew any of this because I had a really good front. I'd be that.
Yeah, you look very sociable,
Yeah, I'm the happy, bubbly girl, and nobody could kind of understand. In the background, I was an addict. I had an addiction because I was self-medicating against being inauthentic. I wasn't being true to who I am. All of this people-pleasing behaviors that I did in order to feel safe in the world. I was constantly walking on eggshells because I was like, okay, I need to do that for that person, at least that one for that person, and that one for that person, and then I will be okay. And I was also a perfectionist, highly, highly self-critical. Like, nothing I ever did was good enough, and that transcended to my work. Also, what I looked like. I had disordered eating, and I was severely anorexic for a long time. And I had an exercise addiction. This was my way of self-medicating. It was my way of soothing my nervous system. And I didn't know any of what I was doing at the time. It was just a survival strategy. I knew what I was doing wasn't healthy, but almost like I was so good at covering it. No one said anything to me. No one really tried to help me. They just kind of let me get on with it. And there's so much shame around addictions, judgment around addictions and eating disorders. It's really, and you feel like you can't tell anybody, but you're locked in this cycle in your head of like constantly like trying to control. It's a control mechanism. Basically, it's like, in order to feel safe, I have to control these things. And then, of course, you slip, it builds up and then you can't be perfect all the time, not even around sort of controlling your eating. Sounds like you kind of understand this as well.
Of course.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's quite common, this disordered eating. And so what happened, I mean, luckily or unluckily, I ended up getting a rib injury through just too much yoga. I was too tired, wasn't paying any attention. And I just remember lying in bed saying, like, I just want this all to stop. I don't know how to make this stop. I don't know how to make all of this stress and all of this pressure and all of this misery stop, but make it stop. And then like a week later, I got a rib injury and I got I got shooting pain in my ribs and it was really hard, but I didn't give up yoga. I was still doing 2 hours of Ashtanga yoga 6 days a week, even through all of the chronic pain. Yep. And then unfortunately, this is what happens with the nervous system. It learns. Chronic pain is a learned response. And I just couldn't get I just couldn't get this injury to go away. I was kind of ended up like crooked like this. My body was,
gosh.
yeah, but I still wouldn't give up yoga. It was only really when I got to the point where I was just, you know, constantly in tears at work. I'd lie on the like changing room floors in the hospitals and just be like, oh my God, how am I going to make it through today? Eventually I managed to stop doing the Ashtanga, but I never stopped yoga. I'd still get up every morning and kind of do it. It was a real addiction. And I didn't know why I couldn't stop. Everyone was like, stop. But I just couldn't seem to. And I didn't know at the time, it was just a way of me avoiding things, me of not kind of wanting to deal with all of the repressed emotions that had built up over the years. And so I went through all the medical system. I went to doctors who'd said, oh, your spine is collapsing. I'd been to loads of Rolfers, many different types of specialists, Feldenkrais. Oh God, I tried it all and nothing was getting. And I just got to the point where I couldn't work. I couldn't cope with my job. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I ended up doing a ceremony. And I just started in a deep dive. And I heard this like voice that said to me, stop fucking around with your life, leave London, leave your job and go and do your shamanic training. And I just knew that that's what I had to do, because 10 years ago, I found this book and I opened it and it was by my teacher, Alberto Viodo, because I trained with the Four Winds. And I knew then that I had to go. I was too scared to answer the call. I was just like, you know, I listened to my family. You know, Joseph Campbell's got an amazing quote that says, don't do what your daddy says because he's only interested in your safety, not your happiness. Follow your bliss.
It's true.
It's true.
Honestly, I wish I'd been him. He gave this speech at a university graduation ceremony. And I was like, oh, I wish I'd known that then. You know, my life could have been completely different. But, you know, it spat me out 10 years later with the anorexia and addiction. Then I had chronic pain as well. Yeah. But that's been my path. And so I did. I was like so desperate. I ended up quitting my job. I left London. And I went off to do my shamanic training. So that was in California for a month. And it was amazing. Like I was there the whole time going, oh, I don't know why I'm here. I hate this. This is a load of rubbish. Because I was so Newtonian trained and I was so resistant. I mean, like 5 years earlier, I'd been in ceremony and I'd been told you're a healer, you're a medicine woman. And my distinct response was like, no, I'm not doing it because it's so different from my life. I can't see how I'm going to do it. There was sort of too much fear. So I was kind of doing what spirit wanted me to do, you know, what life wanted me to do, but I was kind of really resisting it as well. And I did. My training was really good. I did a whole month of it and I met some amazing people. And by the end of it, I did feel better. You know, the pain had lessened.
Wow.
So it was really like, I was like, wow, there's really something in this. And then the next part of the journey is like then to return home, of the hero's journey. And so I returned back to England and that was it. It all crashed.
Oh,
all the pain started to come back, all of the triggers. And then I ended up still not being able to give up doing movement, same cycle. And I ended up, it basically got so bad. I got another 4 rib injuries and I ended up in bed for about a year. Yeah. Barely breathing.
I'm so sorry.
Barely breathing, barely moving, thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to make it through the day? How am I going to get kind of through this? But in all of this, with all of this pain, I have this really strong sense of like, I've lost this inner warrior spirit. I don't know where it comes from, but I just have this like, no, I'm going to make it through this. I am going to heal. I have a vision. I have a felt sense inside of myself for a life that I want, that I know I can have. I don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to do what it takes. And so when I, in this kind of like depth of kind of pain and stuff, I'd been on Facebook and stuff. That was my way of kind of interacting with people. And then I found who was my pleasure coach, and she'd just put this post on Facebook and I've been following her for a while. And it said, I've been dancing and I love to dance. I've just had 8 orgasms and a 10 grand client just popped into my reality. I was like, damn. Wow. Yeah. I was like, wow, all in pleasure. And I was like, okay, like I want to know how to do that, because like there is another way and I don't know how to do it because I can't get myself out of this. I've tried, and because I'm just doing everything from my current model of thinking, my current way of thinking, my current belief systems, I knew I had to have help. And it was like the scariest investment I've ever made in myself. It's the most money I've spent on myself in coaching. Like, she literally had to hold me shaking to pay for it. Yeah, it was really kind of, it was a really big investment for me at the time, because it wasn't so much about the money. It was more like, okay, I'm going to really have to look at what's in here. I've got to really understand of like what's going on, because I still didn't really have any answers. I still didn't know why I was the way that I was, because medically I should have got better. Like, I had an MRI, there's nothing wrong with my spine. There was nothing wrong with me that anyone could find. You feel my tissues and they're fine. I move like I look like I'm fine, but inside there's just crazy amounts of pain and muscle spasms and tension. And unfortunately, mine was in my ribs, so everything would just go.
Oh, yeah. Horrible.
Yeah. And I couldn't breathe. And so there were these threads that I needed personally in order to be able to heal on my journey. And the pleasure coaching was one of that. I think it's Kimberly Ann Johnson of Mag and Mama. She says pleasure can't be an afterthought when healing trauma. And so what I discovered by doing this pleasure coaching was, one, I discovered how I was wired erotically. So I didn't know. I always thought there was something kind of quite wrong with me, or I had a lot of shame, because I'm quite high kinky in my profile. And so I had kind of shame around that. And I'm a shapeshifter. So in the blueprints, it means I shift through all of them. And to have all of them, I need to feel satisfied. And I can match other people so easily that I never felt myself like I was truly fed.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, or truly understood myself. And so I was like, when I learned about this, and I was like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just how I'm wired erotically, naturally.
Absolutely.
And that was like, I always think like understanding is power. Like, when you understand yourself, that's real power.
Definitely.
Yeah, when you understand why you are the way you are, you kind of, there's a level of acceptance around it, a level of love. And then it also is just like, oh, the nervous system can kind of settle. Or that's kind of my experience of it. And so I went through this sort of coaching process, and a lot of it for me was learning, because when there's been pain and other things and a lot of emotional kind of stuff in the background, it's like your body's not safe, like the emotions are not safe, and like your thoughts not safe. And when there's pain on top of that, it's like movement's not safe, this is not safe, that's not safe. You know, it's kind of like your rules in order to feel safe and please other people and stuff, they become even more rigid. So your life becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And that was sort of certainly my experience. And using eroticism and erotic energy was a way of kind of moving through all of those rules, you know, breaking my own sort of pleasure rules, because I hated my body. You know, that anorexia there was a lot of self-loathing, self-hatred, just my body was wrong, and, you know, all of these pieces. And so pleasure and using pleasure practice was a way of reconnecting to myself, learning to accept myself, accept my body in a new way. So I'd be able to, like, you know, it took me a long time to even put my hands on my body. And, you know, it was, yes. So like, I like self-pleasure practice is just a way of meeting myself, because I used to sort of do that in yoga, but not really. It wasn't mainly a way of avoiding. And so for me, I've had to learn to meet myself and accept myself, and love myself with all my brokenness and all of these parts and all of these pain, and, like, you know, not be. And a lot of it is just accepting that I'm not perfect. And that was really, really hard, because if I'm not perfect, that means that I'm not loved. So there was that kind of piece of it as well. But I also worked with an integrative psychologist, and it was through him that I really started to understand myself. So when I spoke to him about, you know, what my life has been like, I was like, oh, I've had this and this and this, and it was a normal childhood. And he was like, Claire, this is profound trauma. This is complex CPTSD. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah. He is like, that is, you know, that is what is going on. This is what you've been running from, all of these kind of old traumas and memories and feelings that your brain has repressed so cleverly. You have absolutely no idea that it's in there. The only way you know it's in there is because your inner child is kicking up symptoms. She's wanting your attention and your love. You don't have any relationship with yourself or your inner child. And this traumatized inner child, all she wants is love and acceptance, and you're completely ignoring her. And I was like, Oh, okay. So it was really with that. Because he's an addiction specialist. He used to be a crack addict and stuff. So he's gone through it. Yeah, he's gone through the same thing, and he's been on his healing journey.
Wow.
So it was him that really helped me understand the addiction pieces, what I was doing, why I was doing it. How do I develop a relationship with my inner child? Like I call her Rose.
I love it.
It just helps me kind of give a frame of reference for her and makes it, rather than an inner child, into something that's really kind of mine, because she is me, right? She's just me with a specific lens on the world, and unfortunately her food is misery and pain, and that's all that she knows, because that's what happened to her. That's what happened to her kind of growing up. And there's a really interesting link, just a bit of a trigger alert here, in terms of, and this is something I found with my psychologist as well, when there's eating disorder stuff, disordered eating, like anorexia, bulimia, what's the other one? Anorexia, bulimia, binge purging, and also sometimes like really overeating, there is usually some form of sexual trauma.
Sexual, eh?
Okay. There's something in that link, and it doesn't have to be it happened to them. It could be carried epigenetically down the family line. That's also possible. There's two ways. And it's like, I'm not saying that happens in all of the cases, but there's quite a strong link, and it can be some form of sexual trauma. It doesn't have to be abuse. So that's a really interesting link that seems to be out there. And I've spoken to other people who work in this field and stuff, and that's their experience as well.
Well, I was going to say, so a lot of times what we discovered in our life and interviewing people is that those type of issues come from childhood traumas. A lot of them, probably 90% of the cases, if not more, when you have issues later on in life, they usually originated from something in your childhood that wasn't addressed, that's still not healed, or, that you're struggling with, right? So in your case, that's what it was, right? And you didn't know.
No, I had no idea. I thought my childhood was really normal. It's only when I've begun unpacking it. Like when I was 11, I was getting bullied at school. And my stepdad taught me, he was like, I'll teach you how to punch someone and kill someone.
Wow.
I was like,
good advice.
Yeah.
I mean, he was SAS, but I just, and I felt his war trauma.
That's special forces, right?
Yes. And I was like, wow.
So it was really hardcore.
So it was like, and I just thought that's what happened as a child. That's completely normal. But if you look at the ACE study, which is the Adverse Child Event Study, there's 10 categories of abuse, and you can go online and do the test and get your score. I've got an ACE score of 4, which is high, which puts me at risk of things like autoimmune disorders, chronic pain, other illnesses, depression and anxiety. There's a really big link between childhood trauma and physical illnesses later on in life, which really kind of fits, because when you had childhood trauma, basically the lens that you look through is, my life is unsafe, I'm unsafe. And that constant fight or flight, the body can't cope with that. So you get all of these different kind of illnesses that spring
of course,
from that.
eventually your body just, shuts down. If you don't deal with these deep, really rooted issues, physically, your body will shut down.
Right? Or mentally, it's either or,
But it starts mentally first, and then physically it really starts to affect you, right? Well, that's amazing that you really turned the page, the chapter in your journey, and you're on your healing, and now you're using this to heal others. So that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it's definitely been, it's definitely been a journey, but then there's the gift in that, is the space that I can hold for other people. I understand so many different things, and one of the things that I do well is, like, I'm a non-neurotypical, so my brain sees in patterns. So I'm really great at seeing where people are stuck. I can see the patterns and the things that link it. And I'm also, from the shamanic stuff, I can feel where the energy is trapped. I'm like, okay, the thread is there, so it's almost like life is moving me in a direction. It's like, okay, you need this skill and this skill and this skill in order to weave them together to ultimately help other people. Because really, one of the reasons that I did this is because I want people to understand they're not alone. Because when you're going through trauma or addiction or anorexia or chronic pain, you really feel like you're the only one suffering it. Like, I don't know anyone else in my life that has chronic pain. So, and then that's been another kind of thread of mine of, like, there is chronic pain does come from unprocessed anxiety, all of that emotional stuff because your emotions are not safe. It's not safe to feel them. As a child, it wasn't really safe for me to feel anything. I was very much like, no, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. What are you doing that? You're doing it wrong. That was pretty much my whole childhood. And in the ACE study, that type of abuse is apparently more impactful than any of the other categories, which is very interesting. So it's that, and that I think that's fairly common, that put down, that making someone the butt of the jokes. I was like the black sheep in my family, the weird one, the one that kind of got everything kind of taken out on. And that actually is basically saying to a child, you're not okay. It's not okay to be yourself. And so we create this false personality around it. And then I lost touch with who I was. I just didn't know I was operating from all of these kind of patterns. And as great they were for me because they kept me safe, they were, ultimately harming. That's the thing with an addiction. It's a behavior. You don't do it because you're an addict. You do it because you just want to feel better, because you feel so bad. You just need a way of feeling better. And then unfortunately over time that kind of becomes like a really negative, it has like negative consequences. And then it's really when you start looking at it and be like, okay, why am I self-medicating? Because you have this hole in your chest because you don't know who you are. You're inauthentic. And I knew the life I was living. I mean, misguidedly, I was still trying to help people out. I was in the medical field and stuff, but I'd go into work every day and cry that they were cutting parts of people's bodies out. I just found it so traumatic on my system. I was like, why are they doing this to the body? And I get it. Like, I think there's a place for Western medicine. Like, it's really like, trauma and stuff like that. I understand that I'm not against it, but I'm also, it's not the whole picture. Where is it looking at the psyche of someone, the whole part of them? And it was kind of that I felt was really missing. So it's interesting how my journey has been like this side, and then now it's showing me this side. And there was quite a clash actually for a long time. It was really hard for me to get this somatic, this body-based way of looking at things into my system through the old, scientific viewpoints of the world, and the pleasure coaching, because it's very much through the body, through the physical body, was really like a really kind of key piece in that.
Yeah. So to backtrack a little bit, you said you're a black sheep of the family. Do you come from a big family? Do you have a lot of siblings?
I have one real brother, and then I have 3 stepbrothers. So my mum had an affair with my stepdad when I was 5, and then he ended up leaving. And then so we ended up being like a blended family. So we were 5 kids every other weekend, I think it was.
Okay. And you say that you were like kind of shame and repressed for being yourself because you were different than the others. Is that how it manifested itself in your childhood?
I mean, I was a bright, when I was a child, I used to play with fairies, and like, I was a really like bright, bubbly, creative kind of child, weird. Like, I used to make stories up and for play. And I grew up with 4 brothers. 4 boys, and so that kind of wasn't really acceptable. But I just remember my stepdad was very harsh. Like he was always
that's my feeling. I get that feeling. It's your stepdad. Yeah,
he was really hard. Like, my dad was part of it too. Like I have birth trauma, so I didn't have that bonding with my mother. I was a beta baby, so we don't have that bond. I wasn't breastfed, which you need to get soothed from the vagus nerve, which calms the nervous system. So I was already set up for this. Wow. And then then I have the daddy abandonment wound when my dad left. He didn't see us for 2 years. And then on top of that as well, this is like, I've got a lovely soup. Then there was my stepdad who was, I mean, I'm sure he didn't mean to do it. He just didn't know any better.
He didn't know any better.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. It's probably how he was brought up.
That's what I was going to say,
and I don't know much about him because he's died now. But I remember my mum saying that his granddad was really, really harsh.
Hard on him.
Yeah. And there's a reason why people go into the military. That's because what they're used to. We're drawn to the energetic signature of what we know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he was harsh, and it wasn't it was more from a space of like, he felt guilty that he left his children. So he really disliked me and my brother. We were terrified of him, absolutely terrified of him. And all my cousins were terrified of him as well. My auntie didn't really used to let them come and stay with us because they were too terrified of him. And it was small things like he would turn the light off because I was really scared of the dark as a child. And I used to leave a nightlight on. He'd turn it up and I'd wake in the middle of the night terrified, or he'd force me to sit at the table for hours and eat cold food until I'd eaten it, or I'd take take my bike down to the shed, which was like at the back of this really long garden with all these trees, and it was really dark, and I was absolutely terrified of the dark. You know, it was like repeated stuff like that. And my stepbrother was the golden child, and nothing I could ever do was good enough. I was never as clever as him, never as bright as him. It was all about academic, you know, how perfect can you be? And then that was my defense mechanism. Okay, well, if I can be as perfect at everything, then he'll love me. And that wasn't the case. I mean, it was, ironically, I ended up getting a first in pharmacology and came top of my year. And my stepbrother got a 2-1, which did not go down too well.
Wow.
But the part
did he ever say like, wow, or was he impressed by that? Or even it wasn't good enough?
No, it was subtle. And because I'm so energetically sensitive, I can feel the vibes. You know, that's how I survived my childhood, to like read the energy. And like when he was like, you know, in a mood, it was like walking on eggshells. I'd hide in my room. And so this was a pattern that I still developed into adulthood. Like I'd go to work and I'd do yoga, and occasionally I'd see my friends, but mainly I'd hide in my room. So I was still kind of living as if that experience was going on inside of me. Because of course, to my little girl, it was, because I wasn't tending to her and I wasn't soothing her and I wasn't telling her she was safe, and, you know, all of the things you need to do to be a good parent. She didn't trust me, basically. And trust is like the most vital thing when you have kids, right? They have to trust you. You'll be there for them and you're their soul.
Of course.
Yeah.
I've got you. It's that feeling, isn't it? I've got you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now we're learning a lot from that because we're expecting our first child. So there's a little 1 month. She's a little baby girl coming up. So, you know, we're going to be parents. So we're going to have to dive into trying to be the best we can, you know?
Yes, of course. But
So
that's
amazing. That's exciting. Congratulations.
definitely, thank you. That's definitely our priority,
Yeah.
is to give our little girl everything that we didn't, right? Because that's something as what you do is like either you repeat the exact same traumas, you know, that you've experienced, or you can choose to do it totally different, right? And again, it's so funny that you say that, because we learned that when we went to a retreat, is that, you know, your mom probably did the same thing that your grandmother did to her. And it's like, it's a vicious cycle. You know, that gets down.
And if it's not good, you got to break it.
And if it's not good, it's learn to break right away to change it, instead of just repeating, right? Because it's true. At the end of the day, when you're a parent, you're doing things that you don't know any better. And it's because that you lived it too. So you think it's okay. Right. So.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's a huge part of it. And also knowing that, you know, you're going to give like 4% permission to fuck it up, right? This is one of the things that I love about my coaching that I work with clients. I'm like, because they tend to have been where I would like the perfectionist, blah, 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 like really kind of. And so I'm like, yeah, you have full permission to fuck it up. Because there kind of is a sense of, and I know there's a sense of responsibility in that, but there's also a sense of like, I remember listening to Panache Desai, and I love him. He's such a beautiful man. He does kind of daily meditations that I listen to. And he was talking about his kids. You know, he's got 3 or 4 kids, and you know, he's doing all of this work. You know, he's supporting people by doing vibrational transformation work. He does free meditations, he does group stuff, he's got an online thing to help support people. And he said to them, you know, my kids are already saying, Daddy, why are you spending so much time at work? And he's like, it's really difficult because he's in service to everybody rather than, so there's that. And he's like, I suspect my children will be in therapy when they're older because of this. And so I was like, wow, that really kind of helped me to understand that everybody has their own path, right? We all have our things that we have to deal with.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
So how old were you when it started to manifest into your life, those traumas, and you started having an idea that you had to address them? Because usually that's the transformational part, right? It starts manifesting, then you start going downhill. Then you have to go over your ego, accept that you're not okay. So, and then you work on yourself, get better, and then, you know, back on track. So,
that's the cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. How old were you?
Mine started manifesting when I was quite young.
Okay.
Because I've got a really strong inner sense of like, this is not right, you know. I think like, people, you know, I get the same vibe for you. We're the pattern breakers, right? We're the ones in our family that are going to do the work because nobody else can do it. So we're the ones that are like, there's something not right. But I remember when I was 15 and stuff, like wanting to kill myself because I just had all these thoughts going around in my head and I couldn't control them. And it's only now I know that was the emotional content. But like 15, they tried to put me on antidepressants, and I've been in therapy ever since then. some
Oh,
form of therapy.
well, that's good though. Therapy is amazing. So I think
Sorry, I'm
every
diving
single
into that
person.
part first
No,
before
it's
we
good.
address that other part of the podcast, because I think that's a very interesting story. And a lot of
Yes.
people on similar notes are going through what you went through.
Yep.
And I think it's good to touch on it because it shows them inspiration of how
On
to
how to do
get
it,
back
you know?
on track. And,
Yeah, if they're feeling the exact same way.
exactly. So that's why I'm like digging a little deeper into that.
No, dig
Thanks
away.
for-
I like
Yes.
deep conversations.
So do I. I love deeper
Yeah.
the better.
Yeah, me too. It's nourishing. I'm not really up for like how you like it doesn't do it for me. I like these really kind of like, you know, heart-based, real conversations.
Same here. Same.
Yeah. So you're 15 and it
So I
starts
was 15.
manifesting.
It starts manifesting.
Vital a little bit.
And of course, then with the anorexia started at 19, and then the exercise addiction about the same time. And so, but it wasn't really until I got the chronic pain, how was that many years? 8 years ago, that my body started to break down and really kind of show what happened. And it was the chronic pain because I couldn't get it to go away. Whatever I did, whatever physical treatment I had, it would last 3 days and it'd come back again if I was lucky. And so it was that really kickstarted the process. Yeah, without that. And it's been a process for me to actually get to the point where I don't want to do my addictions anymore. I don't want to harm myself, because I used to self-harm as well, hit myself and pick myself with needles and all of these things to just take off some of the rage. And it's rage. It's like, you know, it's like a heady mix. Like there's lots of different kind of emotions in the addiction, but there's self-hatred, there's self-loathing. And when there's sexual trauma, there's an imprint from the person, from the abuser to the person that experienced it. And then that's self-hatred, self-loathing, and usually rage. So you get that an imprint into your system, and it's not even you. So it's very confusing inside of yourself. And then there's all the pieces of like, okay, well, I feel this erotic energy, you know, and then there's shame on top, you know, there's a layer of shame, and like, you know, so you get them, and there's rage, of course, like there's this thing happened to you and you couldn't say anything and you couldn't speak out, and then there's, you know, there's like, and it has to go somewhere. The trouble is when it's repressed and it's hidden. I don't so much like the word shadow. I mainly like hidden, rejected sides of ourselves. You know, this rage had to leak out, and so for me, a way of stopping the rage was the addiction. And it was also self-harming because it would just leak out, and then I'd feel better and I'd be like, okay, I've dealt with it. But I wasn't emptying my pot. I wasn't emptying out. I was just like taking the, like, you know, the tiny bit off the top until it like filled up again really quickly and kind of spouted out. And then you've got the bits from it, like the, you know, the perfectionist side, you know, the people pleasing, having to make everyone else all right, the self-critical, and these all kind of add to the kind of the cycle of it.
Oh yeah, I feel you on that. Like, do you still find yourself, you know, with your journey of healing, all that, still people pleasing as much, or did you set up boundaries? Did you have to cut friends and family out of your life? How was that, like that transformation?
Yeah, that's still like mainly I think one of the things that happens is when you have someone that violates your boundaries, you have a boundary issue. So a lot of it has been it being like, okay, what do I need? How do I take care of myself in all of this? What boundaries, what things do I need to have in place to feel kind of safe? Like, what are my triggers? It's really good to know what your triggers are. And okay, how do I deal with them when they come up? And what things can I put in place that maybe mean I can soothe myself? I can reassure myself that these triggers will not happen. So one thing that used to happen for me is like, because of what happened, I have a real fear of authority figures. Like, it used to really bother me, and I've been caught. I've had, you know, people ring you with unknown numbers and have scams. And if you're not kind of in a really clear state, they can be really terrifying because they activate that old kind of control type of, you know, feeling of powerlessness. So one of the things I have in place is like, if an unknown number rings my phone, I have a message on there that says, if you want me to ring you back, please send me your name and your number and why you're calling me, and only then I will return your call. But thank you for your call. You know, just really clear. And it's those like things that I put in place that help me feel like, okay, I know where my boundaries are. I know what I can deal with. I know when to say no. You know, it's like, it's been definitely a process of knowing what my nervous system needs in order to be soothed. And it wasn't what I was doing before. It was totally the opposite. It's very much like lots of like self-pleasure practice, lots of soothing, lots of time in nature, taking deep breaths, you know, being with myself. And a journey of really learning to be with my feelings and to love myself and to soothe myself, to be the adult for myself, to really feel my feelings and not become them.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So boundaries have been a big thing. But first, I think you have to know yourself. It all comes back to that. Really know yourself with that. Know what it is that you need. And sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes someone violates a boundary and you're like, whoa, and I found it was very safe to do this with sexuality, because it brings up the same kind of thing. Do you know yourself? Do you know what you want? It was a process for me to heal those parts of myself so that I could say, no, I don't want to do that. No, that doesn't feel good to me. Because before, I would just not say anything and I would disassociate. I have memories of like watching myself have sex and I couldn't feel anything. That was my kind of protection mechanism from it. And now I'm embodied enough to be like, I know myself and I know my cues to be like, no, that doesn't feel good for me at this moment in time. But perhaps we can do this. This would feel good for me.
Yes.
How does that feel for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of the work around sexuality is communication skills. Like first know yourself and know your body. And then how do you communicate? How do you communicate with somebody else to get your needs met, to get their needs met? How do you create this sense of safety between you?
So before we dive into that, because we're getting there, how hard was it to put like either your ego aside to accept that you had an addiction and you had issues and overcome them? Because it seems like you had a really good life. You had, like you said, everything seems to be good on the surface, and you changed all of that as you changed yourself as well. So how hard was it, or was it easy for you to do that? You hit that threshold enough and let's change everything. How was it for you? Like, how did that happen?
I mean, I was really resistant. I have a part that was really resistant because it didn't feel safe. It was so used to knowing what it like to my inner child, to Rose, if you love me, you abuse me.
Yeah.
That was what she knows of is love. And when I was so identified with her and didn't have that sense of like separation from her, now I recognize her and I know her voices and I'd be like, oh, hello, okay, this is not me. And so, it's been a long, it's been a long process to accept. But then once I kind of understood, I was like, okay, there was that sense of relief because I was like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not broken, which is always this sense of like, there's something wrong with me. Why am I so fucked up? Like, why am I not getting on with my life? Why has my life been reduced to rubble when other people are like fine? There was a lot of that kind of comparison. And it wasn't until I really understood, well, I've had this like profound trauma, and so this is going to impact me. So once I accepted that, it all kind of comes back
and
to
it will if you don't get help, right? Or if you don't really do some self work, right?
Yes.
And I also hate comparing, and I think that everybody does that, and it's the worst thing for you to do is to compare yourself to other people. You don't know what happens behind closed door in reality. People only portray the amazing things in their life on social media.
Right.
With people, right? It takes a lot of vulnerability to be very true to yourself and be deep and to open up with people, right? So people don't like to do that. It doesn't make them, it's not safe for them to do so. So of course, in your mind, they're telling you all the amazing things about themselves. But deep down, I think we all have traumas. We all are broken in a sense. We all have, there's been a point in time where we're like, hey, we need to fix this. Or, you know what I mean? I really think that we're not alone. Absolutely.
No.
We all have so much more in common than we think, and comparing, I think, is just so awful to do. But
no, it is. It is like,
it's awful.
It's one of the worst things you can do, like compare yourself to others, because you're never going to win that game.
No.
Either the ego does, I'm so much better than that. And I did that as like an Ashtanga fundamentalist, like, oh, these weak people who can't do lots of yoga. Or like the end of thing of like, that person's so much better than me, like I'm not good enough, So there's those two kind of spaces. And neither of them are healthy.
No, none. It's exactly. Absolutely.
And talking about addiction, like your addiction would seem really healthy to a lot of people. Like doing a lot of yoga, you would assume that that's a healthy habit. So how did that translate into being a problem for you? Because that one would be hard to address. It's like if I play a lot of hockey or something and people are like, you have an addiction to hockey. I'm like, well, hockey's fun.
Yeah.
How did you discover that?
it was mainly really working with my integrative psychologist who'd been through addiction, who's like, no, this is an addiction. And I read Gabor Mate's work and stuff in the realm of hungry ghosts, and he talks to me, he had an addiction to CDs. So I'm like, oh, okay, it's not to CDs, buying classical, I think it was classical CDs, and I was like, okay, it's not about the behavior, it's about he has a really good thing of like, I said, I'm not interested in what the addiction is per se. I want to know why the
underlying
pain,
issue.
Why is the pain there that you need to self-medicate? And he realized like the only difference between him and a heroin addict, because that's what he did for a job. He worked in recoveries in lots of like really kind of severe heroin addicts on the street. He was like, the only difference between me and them is like the level of trauma. And I was like, wow, so it was really it does seem like a healthy addiction. Like one of my colleagues, she's through it now. She had, I think they call it orthorexia. Like, I'm really clean eating. I'm really healthy. I'm only going to eat this. But when it's an addiction is when you can't stop
it. And when, seeing, a plate of food that's, too much carbs or sugar or something, not eating it. And no, I only have to eat there, that's when I definitely think there's a little bit of red flags that there is a little bit of an issue, an addiction issue, Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and some of it's like totally conditioned, we're conditioned to the media. You have to look a certain way, be a certain
of course.
way, so there's that kind of pieces to it as well. But I think when it spirals over into addiction is when it's really harming. So when I got that injury, I should have stopped, because when you have a rib injury, it's a more disruption to the central nervous system. And if you look at John Sarno's work, the TMS, tension myofascial syndrome, he calls it distraction pain. So he's like, okay, did I really have an injury? Sometimes there is a physical injury, and my injury should have healed in 6 months, in 6 weeks, probably, that type of thing. Then maybe a bit longer to rehab. And the fact it didn't go away and remained chronic, it's like, then there's a question. Okay, why is this kind of pain there? And I totally own that it was really, it was, I asked for it all to stop. And yet I still so stuck that I couldn't stop, but that was my opportunity to stop, right? To really change. And it wasn't until I got to the point where I was like, well, nothing is working. I was literally sledgehammered by the universe. Like if you don't listen to the whispers, it's like,
totally.
So that's how I knew it really wasn't healthy. And I was tired and I didn't want to do it. I couldn't stop. And it was the only way. Like I remember I did an Ashtanga workshop. I went away to do a retreat and I did 6 days of it in a row. And I was like, oh my God, I can actually sleep. I've calmed my nervous system enough because there's breath and there's movement. And in its form, it's beautiful. Like, I used to circulate my microcosmic orbit, and it was like having an orgasm for like 2 hours. It was beautiful. But then there were other parts of like, I couldn't stop. It had to be 2 hours. It had to be 6 days a week, had to be Ashtanga. So can you see the rules? Like the rules with the food, the rules with the thingy.
Yes, the rules, exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Damn those rules. They are not.
No.
And they were okay. And why the rules, right?
Yeah.
I need rules because I don't feel safe. These rules, they help me to feel safe. Okay, why don't you feel safe? And then it comes back to the trauma.
Okay. So then you start healing yourself, and then you go into that shamanic training, and then eventually you end up being a pleasure coach. So how did you shift directly into sex and pleasure, and how did you make that transition, and why? Like, what did you find into that was like, this is what I want to do, like really what I need to do?
It was very much like a sense from, I tend to work with very much, even if I can't understand it logically, it was just a sense from the soul. It was just something in me that I knew I had to do it. And I did like, and this is one of the things, my spirit says do it. And my head's like, no, this is really not sensible. So I just remember that I'd had like an orgasm. And in that moment of orgasm, I often get downloads because that's the most connected. That's my way of like, one of my ways of connecting me back to who I am, beyond the trauma, beyond the stories, beyond everything else, just to know myself as a spirit. And in this moment of orgasm, it was like, you just have to do this. And I was like, okay, clearly we're doing this. And I kind of resisted that as well, which is really interesting, even though I loved it. And I had such a transformation with my kind of coaching. And I'd been like, wow, I understand myself. Like I feel confident sexually. I know what I like. I know more and understand my body. And you're right. Like there really has to be, it's like almost a switching of like when there's been chronic pain and trauma, it's like a process of like reorientating yourself into pleasure. And pleasure can mean like comfort and ease. Like what would be soothing to my nervous system? What will be comforting? Like often my self-pleasure practice will look like me lying down or stroking my skin with very soft like touches or get massage oil and stuff. And sometimes I just hold myself like, you know, with that constrictive, like kinky type of energy of like, you're safe, you're safe. So it doesn't always look like, sometimes it looks like orgasm and like surrender and bliss, but other times it's just that kind of like, it's just basically a way of being with myself. And so I saw kind of the changes inside of myself, how better I communicated. And I watched the shift in my relationship dynamics. So before, I would either attract men like my stepdad, angry, abusive, controlling, or they would be like my dad, absent and not interested.
Okay.
Crazy, eh?
Yeah. And so, you know, doing this work and stuff, like now I have a beautiful lover here. It is like everything's there, the spiritual, the emotional. I mean, it's just all there between us. And there's such a sense of like safety and love. He just loves me. Like all of me is welcome. All of him is welcome with me. You know, we have an agreement. If one of us gets upset or triggered, like we talk it out, and we're not without our problems. You know, he lives in another country and stuff. So we have our edges and stuff, but we work them out because there's just such a sense of love and connection. And it is just so beautiful.
That is beautiful.
So from these kind of pieces in my own kind of transformational kind of thing, I was like, okay, I want to learn how to help others to do the same. Like I know how to kind of help people, you know, past life stuff where the energy is stuck. I can work kind of shamanically and energetically, but it's really nice to have that somatic, pleasure-based, body-based coaching, mapping. I think they all work together to heal trauma. And then obviously the psychological stuff as well of like, you know, knowing and understanding yourself and developing a relationship with your inner child. And then when I work with chronic pain, there's also the other pieces of like the TMS, like, okay, we have to decondition your nervous system. You've just learned that pain is like, everything's dangerous. Like to the brain, it's like a normal sensation or a normal movement in the body. It's like danger, danger, danger. So we have to calm your mind down, calm it down. And so there's that kind of process with that as well. So depending on who I work with, depending on kind of what methodology I kind of deal with.
Yeah, amazing. You did say before that you are a kink, and growing up, you actually felt a lot of shame with that.
Yeah.
Did you do a lot of soul searching as to why? And, you know, just overall, why do you think, you know, there is so much shame with being a kink? And does it stem a lot too, maybe from childhood traumas and things like that also? And how do you identify that with other people, you know?
It's something, it's not always the case, but I've like my mentor, she had a similar background to me and stuff. And there's something in people with traumatic childhoods or something, their nervous system sometimes needs intense sensation in order to be able to relax and let go. And I know from Stephen Poge's work, you know, the polyvagal theory, that when there's been significant childhood trauma, things get wired differently. So your innervation to your gut is dampened down. You know, they prune so many neurons in the brain that don't need to be pruned. So that there's definitely these physiological changes as well. But there is this like, that's how my nervous system likes to relax. And so when I was 23, I had like a kink type of relationship, and I didn't know enough about kink then. I didn't know how to have a consent conversation about how to set boundaries and all that kind of pieces. And so it was quite dark. You know, it was too
dark for your liking.
It was, looking back, I was like, that wasn't held in a beautiful way. So there is this dark edge of kind of kink as well. And that was totally my like not wanting to surrender. Not trusting, you know. One time this is quite personal. One time, he was choking me, and I passed out because I wouldn't surrender and be like, give the safe word.
Okay, I'm good.
Yeah. I didn't know my edges because I didn't know myself.
Okay.
And that's like, I didn't know my body. It was like, it was here for the thing down. I mean, yoga really helped with that, to really develop that sense of like innovation and like, okay, my body feels alive. So, I mean, that was the beautiful side of yoga. But the kink thing, I mean, after that, I put it away and I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I'm so ashamed. And I remember talking to other people about it, and they're like, yeah, that's weird. There's something wrong with you. And I was like, so getting these reinforcing message and not
understanding, you know,
what kink is really about. Yeah. And I find this a lot.
You know, it's actually normal. And a lot of people actually get turned on sexually by kink. And I think it's great, but I'm just always interested as to why, if there's obviously a deeper meaning, because I think there is. I think we're all erotically, programmed for a reason. There's a deep reason why, if we go deep down, like in our childhood or something like that, why we actually enjoy it or something. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes, it doesn't have to be, there's different types. There's a psychological side of kink, the power dynamics, which can be really fun to play in. And then you've got the sensation side of it, the slapping or the whatever.
Yeah.
But like what I find really interesting is like, if you get someone who knows what they're doing, like you get a well-timed slap and it's that vibration that moves whatever trapped emotion is stuck in the tissues. And for me, like what I've learned through a process is like trauma is held in the fascia, in the body. Yeah, it's really...
No,
yes,
it does.
Really
it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And we have all these psycho-emotional contraction patterns. So for me, in a well-held space, like if you trust someone, that's the beauty of kink, because what it does, it provides that container. And what we're all really looking for is an opening into love, an opening into trust.
Totally.
It's like an opening of the nervous system. It's like, oh, I'm safe, I'm loved.
Yes.
All is well. That, and that's one of the beauties from kink. But I definitely see that there's a lot of shame around it. Sometimes in the spiritual community as well. It's like, they want all the transcendence, the energetic side of sex, that melting into oneness and, all that kind of tantric side of thing. But then there's also this edge of like, well, I really like tying someone up, and is that wrong? So there can be that kind of angle to it as well. Yeah. And of course, you with kink and stuff, it can become an issue when, you get stuck in it only being your one way of getting turned on. And that's the beauty, I think, of the Erotic Blueprint course. It gives you variety. It's like, okay, you've learned this way. Let's add on this way and this way and this way and this way. It's like being able to eat the fruits of the world rather than just eating the fruits in the supermarket.
True.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think that's a fair point, that we store emotions in our bodies. Yeah. And I think it was there was some research into it when you would get like a heart transplant or a liver transplant or a kidney, and you would start having those emotions from somebody else's body that would manifest into yourself. And it's kind of freaky, but it's crazy. And I remember like we do a lot of yoga. So I'm a yoga teacher as well. And we do yin yoga, right? And
beautiful.
And I got my wife into it. And the first time she did a yoga class, we were doing this kind of like it's called dragon pose. So it's like kind of a deep squat, like front lunge squat. And she started crying, and it's because she had trapped emotions in her hip area.
Yes.
And then I was telling her that that's quite normal, that you can have those kind of release through yoga, or as you may say, through kinks or sex, right? And, imagine you're having sex and a person starts crying because you give her a slap on the butt, but it's because she's getting those emotions that are trapped coming out, and it's not bad, but it's a fair point that you touched on. And I think it's,
that's what I wanted to ask, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's something deeper there,
Mm-hmm.
So here, like,
and just want to kind of just dive into that a bit.
Yes.
Something that I didn't know, like I'm really emotional during sex. Sometimes I'll scream with orgasm. Sometimes I laugh. After the time I'll cry. Sometimes I'll get angry. And it's like, for me, because I know myself, I warn my partners, I'm like, this is how I am. Are you okay with that?
Interesting.
Sometimes, but I know other people, it's exactly the same for them. Jaiya, the Erotic Blueprints. Yeah, she's the inventor of this methodology, and she's the same, And that to me is the beauty of sex, the freedom for everything. Can you feel all of your feelings, the joy, the ecstasy, the bliss, the pain, the anger, the rage, It's like all of it is welcome in that space, because it is going to come up. Because it's very, very intimate space, and you're being vulnerable. Absolutely. And you're like, so I think I was really surprised when I learned this, and I was like, oh, okay. So a lot of it is like, okay, I'm not alone in this. Other people experience these things too. Okay. So that's another piece of it as well that I think is really important for people to understand.
It is. No, but that's super interesting. I learned something new today, and I guess I could try that. So right after you have your orgasm, if you're mad, you just get mad and you can scream and all that. Yeah, I love it.
Or cry. Yeah, I can cry. Yeah, I don't know, for some reason. Like, especially, like cervical orgasms and stuff like that. For me, for some reason, they make me like scream and then cry at the same time.
I love it. That's awesome.
It just happens.
Go, girl. No, but that's awesome. Why not? You're releasing all that.
Yeah.
It is a release, an orgasm and sex and a buildup. It is a release, right?
Yes,
So it's like
exactly.
you're just releasing. It's like even more powerful than just an orgasm, right? So that's kind of pretty. That's pretty interesting. I love it.
And that's the amazing thing about erotic energy. It moves like stuck places in the body.
Yeah.
It's really kind of that energy to work with is so powerful.
Yeah.
It's like creative force. It just, and it will just
boom,
shift everything through the system.
Wow.
And it's kind of like a form of therapy as well. It's kind of a safe place to let go and get those stuck energies and everything.
And it's fun.
Going.
Like,
it's fun.
Yeah, of course.
What a great place to like have this kind of experience, because there's pleasure and there's connection and there's all these other kind of pieces too. So, it can kind of make it be more like, okay, it's like sex therapy.
Yeah. And it's fun to have those conversations because we talked to other guests and we were talking about how society kind of repressed sexuality. It's kind of like this, you have to hide or talk to certain people that you feel safe with, but you can't openly express yourself out there sexually, or people look at you wrong.
Yeah.
Unless you're in the right environment with the right
people.
like-minded people that will share those stuff with you.
It's just the subject makes people feel extremely uncomfortable.
And we were wondering
Sex
why.
is something that you do in the bedroom with your partner and you shut up. You don't talk about it with your grandma. You don't talk about it with your best. You know what I mean? You don't talk about these things.
Yeah.
And it's true. We're always like, why?
Yeah.
We all do it. We're all human. We don't need it. We all enjoy it. If we don't enjoy it, then clearly there's a
But people are hypocrites,
Well,
they'll say something against you or something because you're too open or you talk too much about sex, but then behind closed door they'll watch porn and masturbate and you're like,
hello?
What the fuck?
Who
are you to judge?
Something I was really quite concerned with as well is like, oh my God, are people going to judge me? And yes, they do. I've been like slut shamed before and stuff like that. Because I'm really open and kind of free. And I was like, I'm sensing, and it was really subtle. That was the thing. It was a subtle thing. And I'm sensing this resonance of this energy there. Is this what I'm sensing? Because if it is, this is not going to work. And so that was when I was like, okay, this is the end of this, because I do not tolerate that behavior in my reality,
No, of course. So again, setting boundaries. Hell no.
Yes.
Anybody like that around you. You want people around you that don't judge you at all. You can have open conversations with and be yourself with, period.
Yes.
It's hard. Yeah. It's hard to find, well, at least I find in my case, in our case, it's hard to find good, genuine people around us. But, with time and all that. And as long as you're true to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you've just touched on a really important piece. Like, community is really important. That's why I love like sex coaching community, because it's like, even sometimes there I'm like, wow, I'm quite vanilla. Which I never thought of myself as
quite vanilla.
I'm quite vanilla in some aspects.
Yeah.
But like, I just feel like I can be myself and I can be open about like my sexuality and things that I want to try and explore. And it's like, it's just this feeling of like love and no shame, no judgment.
Yeah,
it's
no
just
judgment.
Like, and you get celebrated for who you are, for all of your desires. And it is such like a beautiful thing.
No, that is beautiful.
So it's really important to find that, because this journey, you were saying, it can be quite lonely with sexuality because it's so conditioned. It's like money, sex, God. They're like the three taboos, aren't they? Of like, with so many like shadow things around it, and like so many kind of layers of conditioning. And sometimes, most of the time, it's unspoken. Like, I often ask my clients, like, what was your upbringing? Like, what was your sexual education as upbringing? And they look at me as like, what? It's like sex wasn't something we talked about it. It was kind of like,
exactly.
Well, that's it.
People don't talk enough about it. Even growing up, there's kind of like this shame about you have to discover it without talking about it. It makes it hard to kind of know what you get into. And I believe that if people would have a better understanding of that and have better sexual education when they're younger, they wouldn't get into relationships that are abusive. Maybe they wouldn't get into sexual traumas as much. At least it would prevent them, because they would know more about themselves, not to go on those like dangerous field by mistake, right? Because of the lack of understanding about your own self and your sexuality, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, I think that lots of, I wish I'd had this like knowledge when I was a teenager, because my education came from porn. And I mean, like and my sexual blueprint is the lowest on my stack, right? So for me, that's just doesn't work for my nervous system. I have to have the other pieces in sort of play first. So for me, it always led to my, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I frigid? Why am I like, why am I not like everybody else? Why, why do I freeze and short circuit? And I just know that that's part of the energetic. I like space, and I like time, and I like, presence, and I like, kind of slowness and stillness. And, once that's fed inside of me, then everything else begins to kind of open up. But like, not knowing that piece was like, a horrible, like, long journey for me. And then other people who I might have had as lovers, as loving and kind as they were differently wired for me, so they could never quite understand it as well. And then you get this like, okay, this sex becomes awkward and I think you can't talk about it, and then their resentments kind of build up. Like, one of my friends has got a great analogy. She's like, every little resentment is like a brick, and it doesn't take long for a wall to kind of build up between you, and then and then it's like a castle and a moat.
But eventually, you're gonna have to break it. So
yeah, and that's usually when people come for relationship coaching or sex coaching, because there's like, okay, I love this person. And that's a lot that I see with the blueprint mismatches. Like, sometimes I'll see an energetic sexual mismatch, and there's so much love,
there is a connection there,
and they just can't work out the sex bit. And that's just a matter of like communicating, and then taking down those resentments. How do you communicate in a way that's non-critical, in a way that's non-judgmental and loving? How do you, when you get triggered, what are the practices and things you can put in place when you get triggered? You get triggered, and like and knowing the attachment styles with the other person as well. So and their love languages. There's all these kind of different pieces that make for an easier relational dynamic. But we're just not taught these, unfortunately, unless we're lucky.
Not at all.
Mainly we have to learn it
exactly
ourselves as adults.
Exactly, as we go and in relationships and all things like that. So I would like to know more about your method that you use to actually heal childhood trauma with people using erotic energy. So I'm really curious and intrigued about, what's that type of work that you do, and what type of childhood traumas can it actually be?
Can it actually heal?
Yes, exactly. That's a good question. It's also really difficult. Because everybody's different, and like, definitely, if I watch people, they have their own different pieces that they use to kind of heal. But it's like if I make a kind of like a pattern, if I've kind of seen a pattern about it, it's like erotic energy is life energy, right? It's the pleasure, it's the creativity, it's the thing that kind of moves other energies in the body. And it's that connection to that energy I find it's a connection to myself. It's like knowing myself beyond this like human body, beyond this kind of like conditioning and parts and everything else. It's like a way of anchoring myself back into the truth of who I am. So when I forget, all my parts are kind of coming up. It's this energy, working with this energy that centers me. It's like, okay, I'm here. I remember, I'm back on. I'm not just my parts or this trauma. So I think for me, it's that. And then also the pleasure part. So the pleasure part is a way of soothing the nervous system, deconditioning the nervous system. And that's what childhood trauma does. It puts your nervous system on hyper alert all of the time. So everything is kind of becoming danger. You can't relax, you can't soothe, you can't just... And so, this kind of working with this pleasure is like a way of reorientating yourself and like switching from that chronic fight or flight into I'm safe. Like, I can feel pleasure. And it doesn't always have to be pleasure, because that word can be loaded. It can be, okay, what would be soothing for me? What would be calm and nourishing? Like, sometimes I've got like, I love, because I'm essential too, I love like furry things. So I like go and put on my furry onesie, and I'll kind of get into my bed so it's all snuggly and doovy, and I'll like roll around in it and just like feel my skin on the softness of my clothes, and then feel, my feet on the kind of the bed. And it's like that orientation back into myself. It's like a grounding back into the body. It's teaching the body that the body is safe. Like, that's the most important thing. My thoughts are safe, my body is safe. And the hardest one for me, I found, is my emotions are safe. Like, fear for me has been a really difficult thing to be able to learn to hold and not let it take me over.
Okay.
So working with that energy has allowed me to be with both at the same time. So I can feel the erotic energy and I can feel fear at the same time. And for me, that gives me the capacity to hold that in my system.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you.
Yeah. And we wanted to talk about the key areas where people get stuck in transforming their sex life, and if you would like to expand on that a bit. So people that want to change their sex life, where do they get stuck and why?
Usually it's probably not understanding the process of transformation. Obviously they'll have like key kind of sticky points that they have kind of in their relational dynamic. But I think people often can't get past this first kind of hurdle. And it's kind of knowing that like the pieces about it, like say, for example, there's going to be fear. Like there's going to be that like, type of feeling, you know, because it's like you're going to be asked to change because what you're doing is not working and it feels safe, right? Because you're used to doing it, but you want something different. And so there's that kind of that kind of piece that kind of comes up. And that for me, when that kind of comes up, that's a really good sign, because that's like someone's like, okay, I really want to deal with this. And the other thing I think is not trusting the other person to hold you, because people, what they're doing is they're trying to make a decision based on their current knowledge, and they're currently where they are. But the trouble is, if they keep making the same decisions based on where they are, they're just going to spin their wheels. And this is what I did for a long time before I decided to invest in myself. It was the investing in myself that was the key that started the transformation process. And so I just knew I didn't know the way, but I needed somebody else to guide me. And none of us can do this alone. You know, we're relational people, we're relational beings. We need other kind of people. Mm-hmm. And if we don't know if we're kind of like making our decisions where we are, you know, we need to make the decision. It's a mindset shift of, okay, where do I want to be? And from this place, is it a yes or a no? And then also, this is the other thing that I find happens. So then people will make the investment, they'll kind of, and usually it will be expensive, either emotionally, it will be very inconvenient, it'll be expensively, emotionally and financially, and usually it's both. And so there's kind of understanding that piece. And then usually when you put a payment down about something, life will come along and like be like, are you sure you want to do that? Suddenly like all these financial bills will kind of come up, or these other things will kind of come up to kind of be like, okay, you know, and then some people fall down, it's like, okay, I'm not meant to do this. I'm not meant to do this. Apart from, rather than understanding, oh, this is what happens. This is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like transforming their sex life, can it also be, have you ever worked with people that maybe, you know, they wanted to try to have like, maybe they realize that they're gay or something, you know, but they've been with, you know, my God, like a opposite sex relationship, or in a marriage for a very long time. And then they realized, oh, I'm not getting fulfilled enough. There's these deep things, you know, within me that maybe.
Or they're bisexual.
Yes, or something that they've never been, you know.
They're unsure.
Have you worked with people like that too, that were just need that transformation of actually, you know, within themselves of, yeah, I'm actually, you know, I'm gay, or I'm a bisexual. And how do I work through these, you know, these challenges that can come with it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I personally haven't. I know people in my coaching community have. I tend to get people who've had sexual trauma. There's complex PTSD. There's you know, depression, anxiety. There's chronic pain. There's like trauma. I tend to get those type of people. Because that's what I understand, because I know it.
True, because you've been through it yourself. Okay.
Yes. But there are, like, I know that there, you know, this does come out, right? You know, and people as well who are, I think there's actually still these days a lot of shame around bisexuality and
totally.
Stuff. For me, I'm bisexual. I'm kind of quite fluid in that way. And I, you know, as I remember, I got shamed when I was kind of younger for this experiences at school, and then, you know, other people who are judgmental about it. There is that kind of piece and conditioning, but it's the same thing. It's like resolving the emotions about it. Okay, how do I feel about it? Okay, I feel shame. So it's like taking that shame down to a zero. And it's when you start to resolve these heightened, unprocessed emotions that the issues kind of drop away, and then you're able to be more, you're not caught in the pattern of it. You're not caught in the reactivity of it. So there's not like a stimulus and then there's a response. It's like there's a stimulus and you're like, oh, that doesn't bother me anymore. There's no charge. I choose to do this behavior instead, or I'm totally comfortable about it, or, you know, this is an area that is great and I actually now want to explore that. Then how do I do that? So once you resolve the pieces that are kind of in the way, you know, that keep stuck, it opens them up into then another explanation of like, oh, okay, like now I know this about myself. Like, okay, what ways then? How do I explore this safely? And then you kind of move more in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Oh, amazing. So please then share with us a really good success story with one of your clients.
Oh, what would be the best one? I think I had someone kind of similar to me in her kind of process, kind of had disordered eating, that kind of way of kind of being in the world, and then like was single but didn't want to be single, and wanted to kind of, and she wanted a relationship, a specific type of relationship where, that she hadn't had before based on her sort of past and her kind of conditioning. So then it was then again the same sort of process. Okay, well, what are looking at the feelings like that led to this, disordered eating, kind of unpicking out those pieces, unpicking out the pieces from the past where you are, that were in the way of that, looking at the past kind of relationship kind of dynamics and seeing where, the energy was stuck. And it was then the same sort of process of like, learning to yourself, like, who am I? Like, what do I like? How am I kind of wired erotically? So you remove all the breaks, like you remove all the things that are in the way, and then you can just kind of naturally move forward, and now she's like juicy and sexy and just like is such a beautiful, lovely being. She's in the most wonderful kind of relationship. They absolutely adore each other. They have their issues because everybody has their issues, but they have a kind of way of working out. But there's that really deep sense of kind of love, and she has what she wants. Part of the processing is really getting clear about what it is that you want. Are you monogamous? Are you monogamish? Okay, what terms and conditions do I need? Am I poly? Okay, how do I explore that kind of safely? Like, what type of poly am I? There's so many different type of models.
True. Totally.
Yeah. So it's getting that kind of, it's getting all of these pieces to understand. And then, okay, now we know these pieces. How do we get you to where you want to go?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also, I think being able to share that with your partner, right? And being open and honest with them.
Yes.
In order to make it work together.
Yeah. Because part of the work as well, like you can do it if you're single, and then you can also do
totally. But also
in couples,
somebody, right?
Yeah. Like I always send people the quiz and be like, okay, do this, and that will help me understand. I mean, I know the quiz is like the erotic blueprint coach, the quiz, it will give it you from a mind perspective. So you'll get a kind of idea of someone. Obviously, when you go through the body, sometimes it's quite different because people think they're one way in their body. The body doesn't lie; it responds in a very different way. So there's that piece of it. Yeah, but it's really empowering. I feel like it's from having always had so many issues around sex and sexuality and my body, and not say I don't have body image things that kind of pop up from time to time. Yeah, but
I think it's something that's with you forever.
Yeah, I'm just more accepting of it and loving it. Be like, okay,
exactly. I am like, I have a flabby arm. Well, I have a flabby arm instead of before constantly just so worried about it and being so self-conscious about it. It's like you get to a point where you accept it. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Try to at least, but.
Yes.
And how do you find that healing your sexuality or healing, that part or that aspect of a person translates into their life?
Oh, that's a good question.
In other aspects of life, are they more confident? Do they glow more? They attack their career with more assertiveness, for instance?
Yeah, I feel like just because the sexuality is so close to the core of us, it's like, how you do one thing is kind of how you do everything. So how you are in your sexuality will then kind of translate out into life. But of course, if you've got that erotic energy flowing, if you're kind of more comfortable with yourself, if you're having kind of great sex, if you know about yourself, there is that sense of like confidence in my own skin. I'm confident and comfortable in my own skin. Yeah. And also like there is that like, okay, well, I know I know these maps. I know that there are ways that I know that I can be a good lover to someone because I know how to listen. And I also know what I'm kind of looking for to figure out how they're kind of wired. And the other thing is I really know how to communicate with people. So you'll find that communication, if your communication style opens up, it opens up at work, it opens up everywhere, you know, this energy tracks out and does impact your whole life. I think when you've got like a great relationship with yourself or a great relationship with someone else, it's that love. It's what that love that's what radiates out into the world. And I think that's what kind of changes things. If you change inside and you change yourself, it changes the world around you and how you interact with people. You're much more loving and much more kind. Or if you do get triggered, you know much more how to take care of yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
So if we talk a bit about your relationship, because a lot of people, you know, I don't know if they come to you in relationship or solo, but I would assume that a lot of people, it's in their relationship. They want to expand on having better sex, deeper sex, more meaningful sex. And how in your own relationship have you done that work? And was it with your partner from the start, everything was fine? Or what are your tools that you can give to people that they can bring right today to their relationship to try to have those conversations and maybe get deeper into sexual conversation and their sex life?
I think that one of the really key things that I learned is like how to have a consent conversation. So to like really bring up those, and when I first started doing it, I was like, wow, this kind of feels really weird and really awkward. But it was so much easier of like, you know, okay, like in this, what is going to happen? Like what, like I usually start with like, what are your yeses and what are your no's? And people are like no's. And so usually I have to give them some type of thing as like, okay, what about pee or poop? Or, you know, what about, do you like having your tongue stuck up your nose or in your ear? You know, some weird things that people would not necessarily think about.
Too funny.
Yeah, exactly. And people are like, okay, because, you know, I'm like, no pee, no poop. It just doesn't.
Hells no.
Yeah, exactly. So, and what are your yeses and your nos today's, you know? And then, you know, you might be today as like, I don't want penetration. That's not what I want. You know, to be really clear about that from the start, because then there's no confusion or expectation. And if you've got a boundary issue of not being able to say no before, you might just feel like, oh, well, I'll do it anyway, because in this moment, I can't kind of speak up. So it's really good to define your yeses and your no. And it's important to know that a no cannot become a yes.
Okay, very good.
So unless you take it back down to baseline and arousal's gone, because what you don't want to get is like consent regret. That's like a horrible kind of feeling. And then I kind of go into, okay, well, what are your desires? What do you really want? You know, and then we talk about that. And then for me, then where's the aftercare? Like, what do you need to feel safe? I need this, you need that. Okay, great. And, you know, especially in this age of like, you know, STIs and things, like I like to have that conversation around protection and stuff, you know, early and up front, so I don't have to feel like in the heat of the moment, you know, don't want to put myself in an awkward situation. And I think it makes you a much better lover, because you're like, okay, I know exactly what this person desires. Great. I know how to give it to them.
Yes, of course.
And when do you have those conversations? Like, do you have them at dinner time, before sex, after sex? How often do you... Your
first Tinder date?
Yeah, how often?
Talk about it then?
How often do you have those conversations, you know?
I usually have them every time. Sometimes it's briefer if I've been with a lover for a long kind of while. I think it's really check in every time. It's like, it's a way of checking in where you are. And like it probably, if you do it for the first few times, it's going to feel weird and going to feel awkward, but it's only until you start to see the benefits from it, I find when I know where the parameters are. Like they did in a study with kids in a playground, and they found that when these kids have boundaries, they played right up to the edges. When there were no boundaries in place, they just kind of stayed near the middle. So for me, having boundaries gives me a sense of safety. So my nervous system go, okay, I can relax, I can enjoy myself. You know, so there's that. I think you have to do it what feels right for you. Obviously before sex, because after sex it's a bit like, well,
too late.
yeah. So so you just, I guess it's just feeling into when it kind of feels right, and if it doesn't feel right, you just think, okay, well, I need to do it now. And people like, I remember, if they're not trained in this work, people are like, no one's ever said to me this before. This is a bit weird, and I'm like, but this is what I need to do.
Yes, of course, and that's okay. I think that's amazing to take the initiative and just say it. You know, talk about it.
And that's what we discovered talking to other guests as well. It's that people don't have those conversations. They kind of hope for the best. And if they don't get it, then you're a poor sexual partner.
Yeah.
But why are you a poor sexual partner? Because you don't know, or you just didn't hit it. Like, it's kind of like being lucky, right? You do something that the person, it really resonates with them. They'll be like, oh my God, that's such an amazing sexual partner. But anybody else could learn it too. It's just that you have to communicate, and people don't communicate. They get into sex, then they're either deceived. They don't get an orgasm because the person's not doing the right thing to please them.
Yeah.
And because everybody's different. Everybody likes different.
Yeah. And it takes time to learn a body, and it's okay to know, like, it's
and
great.
some people think they're not sexually compatible, but it's like, have you had those conversations? No. Have you tried this and that? No. Well, how do you want to be sexually compatible without at first finding the compatibility?
Yeah. And it's
doing
amazing.
the work.
Like, how many people don't just ask someone, like, how do you like this? Show me. Like, what do you like? Is this good? And one of the other things is, like, how do you give feedback? It's like nothing worse than, because it's so intimate and vulnerable, isn't it? You don't want someone who goes, no, don't do that. I don't like that. Because that kind of puts you into defensive mechanisms.
Yes.
Be able to teach people to do, like, you just say, oh, this feels really nice. I really like it when you do that. And it's feels even better when it's just like a bit slower, maybe to the left. Oh, that's it. Oh my God, that's so amazing. It's that positive encouragement style of, like, it's just so, I mean, these are small ways, but they make like a really big difference. Yeah. And the erotic wiring is a really key piece as well, because you're right. It's often a blueprint mismatch, actually. And sometimes there'll be stuff in the background, breaks that are on, and those kind of pieces as well. But really, it's like, it's amazing, like, how often, like, it's just not quite a match, and you only need some slight tweaks in order to be able to really meet each other.
Yeah. No, the blueprint test was really awesome. We did it, and
what do you
send it to? So I'm mainly sexual, then secondly shapeshifter, and she's the opposite. Shapeshifter, sexual, and then it's the other, like,
nice. Okay, so you've got it's really good when the blueprints match in that way. Okay, because it is true. Like, if I look back at my lovers, and some of them, it was just so easy. It's a blueprint match.
Yeah.
Crazy. I'm like, awesome. I can see that. And when the ones where it was awkward, it was a mismatch.
Yes. Exactly.
I was like, if only I'd known, like, now, so it's really empowering to have this knowledge about yourself.
Exactly. And we have more than one, right? So if you're like mainly one, then you can try to explore the other ones to match your partner. And then that partner can explore the ones that you're primarily dominant, so that you have a better match. So it's kind of like this sex session might be more about, let's say, her, and I'm matching her blueprint to please her, but then I'm giving up mine a little bit. But then next time it's going to be the opposite, or I get to learn a new way to have fun, and then maybe just explore. Enjoy it. And exactly.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes you can play some really fun games of, like, who's the giver and who's the receiver in this session, rather than feeling like you're giving up something. It's like, okay, in this session, I know that I'm the giver, my partner is the receiver, so you can do it with that full sense of consciousness, so that takes away the, like, oh, maybe I'm not getting my needs met, and then you schedule time in for this. Today's me, tomorrow is this one, so you know that you're both getting fed. And you can learn to feed each other in your blueprints. And one of the part of the work that we do is like expansion. Okay, I'm really comfortable in my primary blueprint. How do I play now? How do I expand into my secondary? And often that's a way of meeting your partner. It's like, okay, where we look for, like, where do the blueprints overlap? Where does essential sexual overlap? Like, how do we weave that in? And then it feels easy for both nervous systems, because you think, I can do it. It's like you feel like, okay, I can see how they both merge together.
Yeah. And I think too that people they don't leave enough space in their day-to-day life for sex. And that's one of the reasons that it kind of goes sideways as well. I mean, if your whole week you're about 90%, 95% everything else, and then you keep 5% for sexual fun times, of course it's not going to be like, it's not going to be fantastic, because you're not addressing it like something that matters.
I agree. Like, you have to schedule it in, like schedule in date night, schedule in, like, we have sex labs, and like where you get to play and have an hypothesis and experiment on certain things. then you kind of like figure out, okay, what really works? What would make it even better, you know? So it's looking at things from this aspect of it, you know. And sometimes, and also like having the play of like to totally fuck it up. Because sometimes it just goes really wrong. You're like, yeah, that was an epic fail. And you can laugh about it then.
Of course.
Of course.
Bringing humor to stuff really helps. It's when it gets really serious, that's when it gets a little tricky, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
So before we let you go, would you have any tips just for people to, general tips that they can take, whatever it is, in terms of sexuality?
It would be one, I guess always back to like know yourself, right? Because when you know yourself, you're in your power.
Very true.
So that's a really important aspect of it. And if you don't know yourself, find other people that can help you, or find a community where you feel safe. I mean, that would be another one. Find a community of people, like-minded people, where there's no judgment, where you can be yourself, you know, where you can be explored and you can really be held.
Exchange,
And then you also learn, I think the other piece is like, you're not alone in all of this. We all have our struggles in this in different ways. And when you're connected to a community, there's that a sense of like, a lot of the work for me and for other people is like, oh, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. Like it's just, you know, it's like knowledge, understanding is power. You know, knowledge is one thing, but understanding how it applies to you and your own nervous system.
So true.
And if you can't do it, find someone to help you. Know, if you can, hire a coach or watch videos, or you know, just find a way to really kind of and prioritize yourself. You know, that's the other
definitely.
Absolutely.
Love yourself enough.
Awesome. Love everything. Love it.
Yeah. And if you could put one sentence on a billboard for everyone to see, one word, one sentence, few words, and the whole world would see it every day, what would you share with the whole world?
See, I have two. I have like one from a psychological capacity and one from like a spiritual kind of.
I'll give you 2 billboards.
I have 2.
Lucky you.
This is feeding my shapeshifter. I like one like quote, and it's like, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom, which is Socrates. Like that's been my whole journey, to really know myself, to understand who I am, to accept myself, to love myself, because you can only love someone else to the degree you love and accept yourself, right?
Yeah.
So that's the journey. And then the other thing that I love is like, I probably tear up with this one, is like, my liberation is bound with your liberation. Until we are all free, I'm going to do my like teary thing. None of us are free. And so I really kind of have that kind of spiritual sense of like, this is about service. This is about love. This is about community.
So true.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for meeting with us today. You're really an amazing soul, and
flew by so quick, an hour and a half in already.
Wow.
And we could keep going, but the mama is hungry.
Go feed the mama.
Maybe. But for people who want to be in touch with you, how do they connect with you?
How do they find me? So they can find me. I've got my Facebook page, and then I'm on Instagram. So there is the best way to kind of find me, and it will be Claire Moorcraft. So CLAIRE MOORCRAFT. And it's like I've kept them all the same.
I'll put it down in the description for everyone to just click on it and get right to your Facebook and Instagram page. And if you could send us that link about the test you did for childhood traumas.
That would be score.
Exactly. That would be really good, because I'd like to share that with our audience.
Yeah.
They already got the erotic blueprint quiz from other guests.
We could do that so ourselves even.
Yeah. So
that
you
want
one
the
would
ACE one.
Yeah.
There's a really good book actually that I can recommend. I can't remember the name of the author. It's called Childhood Disrupted.
Okay.
And I'll send you the name of the author as well. Okay. But it's basically what it does is it goes through all the ACE scores, and then it goes through all the physiological consequences, and it maps like it basically is a really good way of like seeing how the trauma really impacts the physiology.
Wow.
And
amazing.
It's quite a stark read. You're like, whoa. But it's really good, because at the end it gives, now you know all this information, you know, understanding is power.
Yeah.
Okay, how do I heal? What are the pieces and parts that I need to do to put in place that help? And it'll give ways that other people have healed.
Okay, so it's a really good book. Yeah,
very
awesome.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate having you on the podcast.
It was amazing. You're amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, it had so much fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.